Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Today, I have a breaking story for you. Just days ago, this case came to a conclusion. And when I tell you we don't see many Perry Mason moments in the courtrooms, it's a misnomer that there are these dramatic, shocking moments in court where information comes out that no one has ever heard before, because there is a process called discovery that takes place before trial, where each side is required to hand over all evidence, including witness statements, what each witness is going to say, that kind of thing. Well, this case is completely out of the ordinary because when the accused finally spoke for the first time, she said something so wildly outlandish, it left the courtroom audience, as well as the attorneys and the judge, stunned. And I have it on video for you. Today, we are talking about the murder of Gary Farris and his wife, Melody Ferris. This is the story of the burn pile murder. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Our story begins on a hot and humid summer day in Atlanta, Georgia. The zinnias and the cosmos and the hibiscus is blooming. The air is thick with southern heat, and people wait for the sun to go down so they can sit and relax on their porches in the cooler air. This is Gary Wayne Farris. Gary was a prominent attorney in Atlanta, Georgia. He was licensed to practice law 36 years ago. He graduated from the University of Alabama School of Law and was working as an attorney at Burr and Foreman at the time of the events we are discussing today. This is Gary's wife, Melody Walker Ferris. The two had been married for 38 years, and they have 4 children together, children who are all adults now. At one point in time, things were good in the Ferris household, but those good times have long since passed. Both Melody and Gary were having extramarital affairs, and those affairs had been going on for over a decade. Melody Ferris was involved with a 60-year-old man from Alabama named Ted Wylie, who, get this, dated Melody's sister for 20 years. What? While Ted was also with Melody's sister, he was having a secret sexual relationship with Melody. So this is some serious hillbilly shit here. It's also some deviant behavior. I'm sorry. I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but there is something so incredibly creepy to me about people who have sex with siblings. I know there are stories out there of like, one sibling dying and then that sibling's lover and another sibling bond over their shared grief and they end up together. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about cheating on one sibling with another sibling. It gives me the wig. The stories I see on TikTok of this happening, it is wild how often this happens. And it's equal between men and women. Men who sleep with their wife or girlfriend's sister, women who sleep with their husband or boyfriend's brother. It is something I absolutely cannot wrap my head around. Your sibling's partner is also your sibling, in my mind. Just like in my mind, my kids' partners are my kids. That's my particular take on family. So if I slept with one of my sister's partners, that would be like sleeping with my brother. I don't have any blood brothers, just sisters. So these men are my brothers, and it's just gross. And stop and think about how devious and sinister this is of Melody to be cheating with her own sister's partner. Think about how damaging that is to her sister. It is just too weird for me. Something happens between Melody and Ted, and they end up ending their secret affair in 2014. Ted claims that he hadn't spoken to Melody for years and that there had been no contact between them for some time. Was he still with his sister? I don't know. Melody was then having a relationship with a man named Roy Rusty Barton. We're going to talk about this relationship more in a minute. Gary Farris had an assistant at work at his law firm, and this assistant was a woman. She knew a lot of details about Gary's life. Her name is Angela Phillips, and she said that the marriage between Gary and Melody was so strained that Gary and his wife lived together but completely separate. So they both occupied the same house, but they were not living as a married married couple. The Ferris home is a farmhouse on 10 acres in Alpharetta. Angela testified that the two were at odds would be an understatement. There was very real tension and anger between the couple. Angela says that Melody would disappear for long periods of time when she was spending time with other men. Angela said Melody began running up Gary's credit cards. She was spending a lot of money, but that money was made by Gary. Angela admits that years ago, she and Gary became very close and that yes, they have kissed, but that she later met Melody and told Gary that she would not continue any type of romantic involvement with him out of respect for his wife. Angela says her relationship with Gary was strictly professional after that. I had a more difficult time finding information on whether or not Gary was actively having an affair or had a girlfriend at the time of the events we're talking about. There are allegations that he did. Things were so bad between Gary and Melody that in 2010, Gary filed for divorce, but then withdrew that petition about 6 months later. The couple stayed legally married. One of the couple's adult sons, Scott Ferris, was looking for his father on this massive property. I found some photos of the property, and as you can see, it's massive. It's lined with a fence, and the living space and barn sits at the end of a very long dirt drive. It's actually very pretty with lots of green grass and trees. So Scott is walking around his parents' property after not being able to reach his father by phone. He knows he's not in the house. As Scott is moving through the acres, he sees the burnt area in the lawn that Gary used for burning branches and weeds. Scott gets closer and he realizes something is very, very wrong. And then he sees the charred remains of a human being on this burn pile and he realizes, this is my father. Ugh. That must have been absolutely horrifying for Scott, and I truly feel for him. No one should ever have to experience that type of trauma. 58-year-old Gary Farris is dead. Scott's initial reaction was to think, Dad must have had some sort of medical emergency. Perhaps he had a heart attack, and then he fell into the burn pit while burning foliage on the property, which is something Gary was known to have done, burn debris. So Scott calls the police, who arrive at the scene. The coroner is contacted, and Gary's charred remains are taken in for autopsy. That is when a bullet was discovered, lodged in the rib bones of Gary's body. The coroner then began a more thorough autopsy, and because the body was burned so badly, that was a process that took about 2 weeks in order to validate that the body was that of Gary Farris. 2 weeks after the burned body was found, the coroner picks up the phone and informs homicide detectives he has verified this is Gary Farris and he has been shot and murdered. An investigation into the murder begins. Right off the bat, of course, the police questioned Melody. They questioned the adult children. They questioned people who knew Gary professionally and personally. The GBI confirmed the identity, but the sheriff was not ready to reveal a suspect to the public at that time. The sheriff did, however, state that he was confident this was not a stranger-on-stranger crime and that Mr. Ferris knew the suspect. Captain Jay Baker said the condition of Gary Farris's body made it especially difficult for the investigators and crime technicians who worked the case. News slowly began making its way to the area news outlets that this couple had very serious marital problems. But because Melody was not arrested, people believed it might have been someone else who committed the murder. A friend of Gary's named Tim Inman, who grew up with Gary, told the media, "When I first heard the news, I couldn't believe it. He was just a really, really good guy. He was a genius. Chemistry, algebra, you name it. He was good at everything." In June of 2019, 59-year-old Melody Ferris was finally arrested for killing the Atlanta real estate attorney. This came as a shock to the public because people were under the impression that all of the family members had been investigated and that because it was taking so long to make an arrest, it must be a perpetrator that was much more difficult to uncover. The police told the media that Melody Ferris was being accused of shooting and killing Gary, dragging his body to the burn pile, setting it on fire, and then trying to conceal the crime on their massive property on Purcell Lane. At the time of her arrest, Melody was in Tullahoma, Tennessee. With who? Roy Rusty Barton, the man I mentioned earlier. Melody was extradited from Tennessee to Cherokee County, charged with malice murder, aggravated assault, and concealing a death. She was booked into the Cherokee County Jail around 4 a.m. and was scheduled to have her first court appearance the following day.
It is a case that shocked the Cherokee County community. A wife and a mother accused of killing her husband. Melody Ferris went before a judge today. She is charged with killing attorney Gary Farris 1 year after his remains were found on the family's property. Detectives say she tried to hide the alleged shooting by burning his body afterwards. Today in court, Melody Ferris was given brief instructions about her charges and upcoming trial. She then went back to her jail cell.
Roy Rusty Barton was interviewed by the investigators, and he made a shocking statement. He and Melody were apparently talking about Gary when Melody got quiet and then said, "He's on the burn pile." Rusty said this call took place the day of the murder. The cops had more evidence. Blood matching Gary Farris's DNA was found all over the couple's home and on a blouse and pair of shoes belonging to Melody Ferris. And I find that strange. It's like she knew she was going to get caught and didn't attempt to get rid of the bloody evidence. That to me makes it seem like she just burned Gary's body so she didn't have to deal with it, didn't have to worry about it decomposing and making a further mess. It seems quite cold, but you have to be cold to murder someone, especially the father of your children and the grandfather of your grandchildren. Melody made no attempt to break up the charred remains or to bury them. She had just left them behind on the burn pile. It's like she had resigned herself to getting caught. Melody's defense attorney, Michael Ray, told the press the case was much more uncertain than it seemed. He said, "I think it's strange that the cops are saying there's one caliber one place and another caliber another place, and they don't have any gun. It's definitely an odd set of circumstances." The gun the police were looking for was a .38 caliber handgun. Investigators did not find the gun inside the home, but they found a place in the home where they believed the gun had been stored, and it was now missing. Melody's attorney went on to say that Melody's affair was no secret. He said Gary was well aware that his wife was seeing other men. He said Melody lived in the upper 2 floors of the $1 million home and Gary lived in the basement. The attorney said everyone who knew this couple was aware of the situation. But when Melody was questioned about the affair, she denied it. The cops only found out about Rusty Barton because they discovered his debit card in Melody's purse. The cops went through Melody's phone. They discovered 3,200 texts and phone calls in the 6 months before Gary's death, the calls and texts between Rusty and Melody. Melody told the cops that she and Gary's biggest argument was over money. She said, "Gary never gives me any money," and that she always has to take it on her own. You know, that's what they were fighting about. She claims Gary wouldn't even let her have her own debit card. Melody found out that her husband had given one of her sons a very large sum of money for a luxury vacation, and this made her angry. Why was her son getting money when she wasn't? Wow, that's a different kind of mom for you right there. Later on, it would come out that Gary spent lavishly on his children, and this was an ongoing source of Melody's anger. Why would you not want your own kids to have money and gifts? I think that's really telling of what kind of a person she was. She basically wanted this man to support her. She wanted to live in his house for free on the top 2 floors and have him in the basement. She wanted all of his money, but she didn't want to sleep with him or have anything to do with him. That's called being divorced, Melody. And then you have to have the courts get the money for you. I mean, men have audacity, but some women have the audacity as well. Melody claimed to police that the last time she saw her husband was on July 3rd, 2018. She claims that she was the one who initiated a search on July 5th, and she asked her kids to come to the home and help look for Gary. Melody also claimed that her family was standing by her. Chris Ferris, another adult son, told the press, quote, "This is very embarrassing for our family. Our father was the best person in the world." There was a very real question at hand. Gary Farris was a giant of a man. He was 6'4" tall and weighed over 300 pounds. There is no way that Melody got that body from the house where police believed the shooting took place to the burn pile far from the house. Well, I have to disagree that it's impossible. This is a farm. farm. I was thinking to myself, there had to be a tractor or some type of riding mower, and all Melody would have to do is get the body to a doorway, and she would then be able to attach the body to some type of equipment and drag it to the burn pile. It really wouldn't be all that difficult once he was out of the house. And if you have to drag something heavy, you can just pull it on a blanket. You don't have to pick it up. I've used blankets to move heavy things before. When I was getting a divorce and had no help moving my things out of the house, that's how I got heavy things, out of the house to the truck and the ramp, to drag it up into the moving truck. I was young and strong back then, but it wasn't that difficult to drag something on a blanket. The defense attorneys told the press that Melody is small and frail. Prosecutors called her a farm girl who was stronger than she looked. And then it came out that the cops had found blood on one of the tractors. So when I read that, I was like, well, I guess I think like a murderer, which is, I do this all day, every day for 5 years now. So that comes as no surprise. I've pretty much heard it all at this point. Now, Scott Ferris, one of the sons, lived in an apartment above the barn on the property. That was his full-time residence. And Scott was known to own guns. But Scott was the person who found his father's body and called the police. So after Melody was arrested and jailed, her trial began on October 7th, just a few months ago. Scott Ferris took the stand and testified against his mother. So Melody's attorneys claims that the family was standing behind her. That was definitely not the case. Melody sat and listened as her son spoke. He said that when he told Melody that he'd found Gary burned in the burn pile, her reaction seemed insincere. He said, "I've seen my mother cry hundreds of times throughout my life, and this day it appeared to me to be fake." Scott sat on the stand and cried as he told the jury that he loved his father, and he insisted that although he lived on the property, he had nothing to do with the murder. Christopher Ferris took the stand and told the jury he was devastated at the loss of his father and that the family had been torn apart, so much so that no funeral was held for his father. The family believed that a funeral would cause unnecessary drama and heartache to try and put together a funeral when their own mother was under suspicion. At trial, Melody's attorney told the jury that Christopher Ferris, among other family members, had been stealing money from Gary at the time of the murder. She's now throwing her own kids under the bus. The defense claimed that weeks before Gary's death, Gary sent a text to Christopher that said, "Your stealing money is out of control." Evidence was presented that Melody Ferris sent a text message to her friend and neighbor, a person named Terry Braswell, and that text said, "I hope Gary dies alone and a gruesome death." Damn, I would not wish that on my worst enemy, and I have a few. That is a horrible thing to say. It's such bad karma, too. Witnesses took the stand and were questioned about Melody's affair. They said she would drive to a hotel in Dalton and spend the day with Rusty, and then the lovers would part ways and drive back home. So that had to be very expensive, buying hotel rooms over and over for these meetups. Hotel costs are so high right now, it's crazy. That was part of the reason Melody was running up Gary's credit cards. Melody also had multiple burner phones to communicate secretly with her lover. I don't know why you need more than one burner phone, but apparently Melody thought she did. The state called 36 witnesses to testify and introduced 1,200 pieces of evidence. The evidence included crime scene photos, digital evidence, cell phone records, Google records, and then, of course, blood and fire evidence. The testimony came to a conclusion, and the prosecutors and defense made their closing statements. Prosecutor Megan Frankish told the jury, "The last thing Gary saw was staring down the barrel of a .38 revolver in the hands of his bitter wife, who was constantly betraying him. This was the ultimate betrayal. You do not get to shoot and mutilate your life partner. You don't get to take away the grandfather of your grandchildren. That is not your choice to make. The ultimate betrayal. Gary will not walk through that door, and that's because she took him off the planet. Find her guilty of all the counts in this indictment. The evidence and the law demand it." Melody herself never took the stand. The jury deliberated for over 3 days. On November 4th, 2024, just weeks ago, Melody Ferris was found guilty of the murder of her husband. Her sentencing hearing was set for December, and it took place just a few days ago. Melody was sentenced to life in prison and remanded into custody. But before she was allowed to make a statement. What you are going to see next is something so shocking and very rare in a court of law. It is also very, very disturbing.
All right, Ms. Ferris, if you have a statement.
I do.
All right.
I've written this so that I could get through the words.
Okay.
On July the 5th, 2018, 6 years, 5 months ago today, began the worst nightmare that I could have ever imagined. Not only my world, but my family's world was absolutely destroyed at the hands of one person. I've had 6+ years of being told not to talk. Don't say that. Take legal advice. I could walk out of this courtroom today and drop over dead. I want to make sure that my children, my grandchildren, and Gary's family, and to be honest, at this point in time, the entire world who has viewed this. I have waited for years to make this statement to everyone. I want the world to know who did this. I have always heard that the courtroom is the last place you're going to get the truth. And has that ever been proven to be the truth in this case? Not only did I not do this, I know who did. I know Scott killed his father. He took my husband, the father of Chris, Emily, and Amanda. He took Big Daddy from our grandchildren, Ella, Addison, Olivia, Jax, and James, 3 of them who never got to know Gary. Scott, this is unforgivable. Scott has spent an entire life of loving and protecting you, but this I refuse to cover for you. My mother, your mom, begged me to take the blame for this. She said after she talked to you, after Gary died, that she knew you had done it. Her exact words were, "You are his mother. You have to take blame for this." And I told her no, that I couldn't. I still have 3 other children, grandchildren, and this is not a stolen credit card, a check, or a diamond ring that you've pawned, all of which you have done. I saw you coming from that burn pile the morning of July the 5th in your truck. You told me that you were checking on the fire to make sure that it wasn't going to get the woods on fire. You told me it was okay. I asked you a few weeks later why you were at that burn pile in your truck. And you told me that your dad had told you to clean up the extra wood that was by the barn. I told Hayes that I had seen Scott that morning coming from the burn pile. So, Hayes, where is that recording? I want to know. You told me there was multiple recorders. You did, but you sat here in this courtroom and you told this court that you didn't tell anybody about recorders, but you did. Where is that recording in the interview? You, Scott, immediately started saying that there was a gun missing, a gun that nobody knew about. You never mentioned before. I asked you more days than not where your dad was, and this was the first time you ever had that response. There's a gun missing. You should have you did start immediately spinning your story when you found out that Addison and Cameron were there the night before, you got so angry. Now I know why. When I went to feed the baby goat the morning
Hold on.
that
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point. It's all about facts of the case. You emphatically stated your statement needs to not be about facts of the
Right,
case.
well, Ms. Ferris, really not supposed to go into the evidence of this phase of the case. And what I typically do is if the defendant wants to go into the facts of the case, I'm going to allow the state to cross-examine or ask questions, which I don't really anticipate you want to do.
I would just ask to
But
close, Judge.
your statements needs to be constrained to the punishment.
I have never, ever seen anything quite like this in a court of law. What shocked me even more while researching this story were the comments in the videos I watched of this event. So many people were commenting, saying they believe this woman. I about fell out of my chair. What? People were saying, she seems so believable. I believe that a mother would lie to cover for her own son. Okay, maybe, but not a mother who is furious that those sons are receiving gifts from their own father, the father she despises with the heat of 1,000 sons. Not a mother who has been cheating on their father for a decade and stealing money from him. I was gobsmacked at the amount of people saying they believe her. Now, as I've said before, I know I am a horrible, jaded monster, but I could not believe it. As you saw, the prosecutor interrupted this statement, not because of the accusations, but because Melody was trying to introduce new evidence. And this hearing was about sentencing. There are very strict rules about these things. And I personally think the judge was very patient in letting her go on as long as she did. This is a sad and upsetting case all the way around. So many people live in miserable conditions, and that makes me sad. Get a damn divorce and move on with your life. It never ceases to amaze me that there are so many people out there who would rather murder someone than divorce them. If I do this for another 5 years, I will never understand. I want to send love from our community to the children and grandchildren of Gary Farris, as well as to his extended family and friends who lost him. You have been through a literal nightmare, and we are all hoping that you are doing the best you can. There is always a better alternative, no matter what the situation is, to taking a gun, murdering another human being, and destroying their corpse. I mean, that should go without saying, but here we are. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I really appreciate you stopping by. If you would you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me? I want to give a special thank you to my patrons. Some of you generously donate a few dollars a month to help me keep the episodes coming, and you will be getting a new drop of bonus content after the first of the year. I'm really going to start focusing on my Patreon more. I've been doing this for almost 5 years, you guys, and I make sometimes $180 a month on YouTube. I honestly was going to shut the channel down at the end of the year. But I found a new promoter who is literally like, all of your stuff was put in wrong. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing here with the analytics. He is like, give me 90 days to change all of your analytics, and I promise you your channel's gonna grow. So I'm gonna give it 90 days and then we're gonna see where we're at. But you patrons, I love you to death. You know, I've got 2 podcasts I have to talk about. This one's called Dining with Death. This one's called Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. This is the current podcast. I post brand new episodes every Monday and every Wednesday, and you will hear some stories there that you won't hear on YouTube. Both podcasts are on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon. You also know we have a fundraiser. I know it's that time of year, but if you got a few extra bucks, you're going to donate to a good cause. Watch this little video. It will tell you everything our community is doing to raise money to donate to police departments. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate or do not celebrate. I hope you're enjoying your time. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.